Okay, well, welcome to 2025 and welcome to the AES Melbourne. I'm your chair, Graham Huon. I wanted to briefly outline how we use the chat sessions tonight. If you have any questions, it's a good idea to put them into the chat so that we can capture them and then make sure that they get addressed by somebody during the evening. So if you can do that, but otherwise, if you can mute your source, that would be a big help. Tonight's session is a time portrait of the Melbourne popular music scene over the years. A lot of world-influencing artists progressed their careers in Melbourne. Names like Little River Band, Midnight Oil, Daddy Cool, AC/DC, In Excess, Australian Crawl, and many others, as well as overseas artists, spent time and left an audio impression here. Tonight we are very privileged to have Ross Cockle here to give us a trip through history for the Melbourne studio recording industry. The rise of these many and other artists and the evolution of some of the recording and production equipment will be covered. Ross claims he rose through the ranks from dogsbody at Armstrong's studios in South Melbourne to dubbing room and assisting on sessions and eventually recording music of all styles with some of the biggest bands, composers, arrangers and labels. There is more to unfold with this story, so can you all please welcome Ross to AES Melbourne for the February 2029 presentation. Thank you, Ross.
Thank you.
You can unmute the applause. Very good. Thank you very much, Ross.
Yeah, so thanks for that. I'm not sure. No, it is just about Armstrongs or the time at Armstrongs for now. And that was a very busy and sometimes blurred time. Not that I ever got into any of the drugs, but everybody around me did. But that isn't what blurred it for me. It just was so busy that some of the timeline in this maybe I've got it down to the right year, but heaven knows what month some of this stuff was done. But I'll get into it now. So obviously the time I started at Armstrong's, there'd been a lot of action beforehand because he was there from 65 to 73, and I was there for 3 months in that transition, and yeah, it was a great place to work at. He'd taken over two little houses on Albert Road, and 100 and 110. I was interviewed by Roger at 110 in the front office, which I think was Bill's office, I later knew. But once they got me there, it was they weren't sure what to do with me, but they just needed more people because of the transition to Bank Street. But just before I got there, they'd taken delivery of the first Australian-built 16-track by Graham Thurkle, who also built that console that you can see. And that was the configuration that I came into. I didn't ever work properly as an engineer in that room, but so many things had been done there. That's Graham Owens, but this is the control room in that little house that they put together that did so many hits, so many records over that period of time. And this was the control room that I assisted briefly. Like they'd call me because I started dubbing eventually once they showed me how to use everything, but to buy cigarettes and booze for them. And I was 15 going on 16, but that was Port Melbourne, South Melbourne in those days anyway. So I didn't mind at all. The Palmerston Hotel was the closest place to get those things, and most of them did smoke. Horrid habit. And these were some of the microphones that were there that eventually transitioned to Bank Street, but I got to use a fair amount of these mics, mostly the Neumanns, RE20s. They kept buying more and more RE20s as it went on because they seemed to just appear. We had a lot of 47s as well, the FET 47s, and I didn't ever see the U47 valve. I think Bill put it away and kept it for special things, but there were certainly a lot of the 67s and 77s that had really worked hard by the time I got to start using them, because they'd actually crack up after a while, whether it was because of the connector or whether they got spit on the capsule, but they were pretty tired by the time I got there. But there were more than enough new microphones. So Bill at Albert Road had 100, 110, also had 64. I worked, eventually the dub rooms were in 110, and that's where I spent most of my time there. And he also rented or leased these other buildings and put commercial writers in there as well. But the year before I started at Armstrong's, I was working upstairs at 64 Palmerston Crescent. On school holidays, I worked with Ted Mason, Edwin McQueen Mason, an editor, and because he was about to marry my sister. So it was really good. It was like it's such a great place to work at. I didn't do much hands-on then, but then they hired me the next year, and I worked at Bilcock and Copping for a year under the guide of Ted Mason and David Bilcock and Rob Copping, but mostly Ted Mason, where I did neg matching and was able to use a 35mm projector and double heads, which is the audio and the sprocket film together, and line those up. And so it was sort of interesting to play back films like Stork and Alvin Purple, and they moved from Palmerston Crescent to that little spot asterisk down there in St Kilda Junction, and I was still able to ride my bike to there, which was one of the kind of great things about working in the area. But the other thing was that Jim Conway was an assistant there as well, and he appears later on in this story. He was a musician and in Captain Match Whoopie Band, but he was an assistant for somebody else, Peter Lamb maybe, I'm not sure who, but he was an assistant. We were both doing assistant work, and I was supposed to become an assistant editor, but I actually left not really knowing what I wanted to become. And so I got an interview with Roger at Albert Road, like I said, at 110. And I remember wearing a Port Melbourne football jumper with a suit coat over it, because I'd become quite free. Like the craft companies, film, music, all those. They had a very free approach to wardrobe, and I was able to wear what I want. But I think I got the job because Ted Mason would have put a good word in for me. So I was at Albert Road for that amount, for the 3 months. But I did see this stage of Bank Street, the red wall being painted, and then I think once we moved in, that's when the logo went up there. But I saw it just as the red building, and it was quite, filled up the senses in every way. But I started dubbing. A guy called Chris Napper was the dubbing engineer there. I think he went on to be part of Richmond Recorders. I'm not sure. People came and went at the studio. Not many, but they'd disappear, and you'd go, well, actually, I didn't ever think about it. I never knew when Chris left. But he was the dubbing guy, and he sort of showed me, everybody showed me how to use it. But these were the machines that I got to know first, especially the Ampex 351 and the roller machines as well. Beautiful sounding machines. But there were two dub rooms. There was one that had two roller machines in it, another one that had 3 or 4 of the Ampex 351s. And I realized in retrospect that's where they started to make their money in commercial work and being able to supply copies to radio stations. And the reason Bill picked that area was because of being so close to the advertising agencies in St Kilda Road. Very clever. His whole beginnings were very, very clever and very well thought out. So when I did I went to Bank Street and did a few things there, but I saw that wall at about that stage, that's Studio 5, one of the voiceover studios. And that was one of the first things I saw there, because Bill had his office upstairs by then. And Studio 2 was working. It had already done so much recording. They got Studio 2 going pretty well straight off. But this is the kind of footprint of the building, which is huge after the little houses in Albert Road. I never took it in properly. I mean, I knew, I just went, okay, he has this building and he's got those buildings. And so Studio 2, like I said, was already going, and they had a Optro console in there and an Optro 16 track going by then. And it had already sort of got a name for itself. It was not much bigger than the house, but a little more versatile with a vocal booth, and probably I don't know whether it was a much better sound because it was carpeted, the Albert Road place, but it was a good size studio and well fitted out with the gear. And that's the console I think was at Palmerston Crescent, and the 16 track, and they mixed down to a AG440. But they'd done quite a few things. That's Graham Owens, that's David Mackay, EMI house producer with Roger. And that was all going when I got there. I didn't get to see it too much. Studio 1 hadn't been completed by the time, I think when we moved in. It was still, hadn't had any glass in it. But I didn't see a lot of that because I was kept down at Albert Road. But this is what they were putting together. An incredible undertaking, really, to get it all happening. And you've got great interviews with Bill on your website, which I recommend everybody have a listen to, because he goes into a lot of detail about how he got the building and even how he got through to being able to use little houses in Albert Road. But incredible situation. And they put, again, I don't remember seeing this, but they put the desk from Albert Road into Studio 1, and that was a big space, and they were definitely after bigger sessions, and probably always were asked to do those bigger orchestral things, which they did in sections at Albert Road, but a lot of the arrangers wanted to do it all in. But this, that could have, it must have been used a fair amount, but I wasn't in the studios really for the first 3 or 4 or 5 months. So the dub rooms were moved to Albert Road, to Bank Street, and I kept doing that for a while. And Bill put his cutting lathe into the vocal booth at Studio 1 because radio stations still wanted acetate, still wanted discs of commercials, and he said he was very, very busy. And I remember the lathe being set up in the vocal booth before the studio was sort of up and running properly. These are the engineers that were in place when I started, and pretty much they're the ones I watched and learned from. Moreover, Roger more than anybody else, Ernie a little bit, Graham a tiny bit, John Sayers a tiny bit, but Roger was the one that I tended to assist, or eventually assist, or he would tell me how to set up and things like that in his very, very methodical way, coming from the English form of sessions and things. A great, very economical with his language, but also so knowledgeable about things. But they'd already done these 2 albums in Studio 2. I'll have a link that you can have a listen to a couple of tracks off this, but that had already been done probably in the year 71 or early 72, but so many things that they'd recorded. And of course, all of these jingle writers came along with them. Brady and Peter Sullivan later on. Peter Best, of course, was already doing things. John Farrar, Bruce Rowland on and off. He worked at other places, but he was there. Bruce Woodley did jingles as well. Johnny Hawker didn't do much. I didn't get to work with him much, but I eventually worked with all of these guys. Tweed Harris, Don Moody, Jeff Hales, Hans Poulsen wrote a few commercials. Peter Jones, Ian Mason later on, and Keith Moore much later on. But that's where the money was being made. So much work done so quickly. They could record a jingle or a couple of jingles in half a day, do all the dubbing, which was what I was doing, and get it out there. And that advertising agencies paid a lot for that. And, you know, it was very lucrative. And that's what that's what grew the business and grew the studio, because I remember Bill would put bands in late at night because if they couldn't pay so much, and he'd do deals for everyone, and kept doing that. And those deals still happen today. It's just the state of the art of music, I think. But so what happened with me dubbing is that this is Philip Webster and some guy, some advertising agency fella, but this is Studio 5, where the money was being made, and he's incredibly professional. Philip, a lovely guy, really knew his business, and I got to. They put me in to do demos and vox pops and editing in the voiceover studio for a while, and I thought, I'd already assisted on music sessions and went, is this what's going to happen? And I think they didn't say it to me, but it was more just being able to handle tape and do edits and do all that sort of thing. So it was just another stage, but no one ever said that to me. So I got a little bit disgruntled, and I didn't really have the gift of glad handing the advertising people. And if they asked me what I thought, I'd actually tell them what I thought. And you're not really supposed to do that. You're supposed to judge what they want to hear and say it back to them. But anyway, that I didn't last very long in that stage. And as an assistant, one of the first credits I got was on Smoke Dreams. And this is where Jim Conway appeared again with his brother, who formed Captain Matchbox. Ernie did the album and got me to go out and record sound effects. I'll have a link. I'll supply a link where those sound effects went. But I was told to go out and go to Luna Park and get all the noises there, and get a train coming and going. There was somewhere else, but they just gave me the Nagra. Someone showed me how to put up an X of the XY of the KM84s, which are beautiful mics, and I still use them today. I just was walking around and recording whenever I felt like it. And I walked into Luna Park and got all the sounds, and then someone came up. They used to wear blue jackets or something. Someone had some kind of jacket on. Come up and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm just recording." And they said, "Have you got permission?" And I said, "No, but I'd already done it." So it didn't really make any difference. And then another one was Roger's doing an orchestral album with Graham Kennedy. And strangely walking in, I didn't think that they'd need someone to record an audience. I thought that they'd be able to do it there. I didn't question it, but I just thought, they should be able to do it at Channel 9. But they sent me in a cab with the Nagra and 84s, and I stepped into the TV because I stood next to Graham Kennedy, right where he delivered his monologues and everything. At the end of one of the shows, they kept the audience back, and we just recorded a few different types of applause for a song called Applause, which is on that album. And I've got the link to that. I won't play it, but it's just literally what it was. But it was after all those years of watching him on TV, and there I was standing next to him with him going, yeah, and I mean, the Niagara's is such a beautiful machine, and seeing those meters dance when the applause happened, it was fun to do, but just kind of a bizarre position to be in. But I didn't get any credit on the Graham Kennedy album, but my first credit was on Captain Match Whoopie Band. And John Sayers, who eventually disappeared, my first OB was with him recording John Mayall at Festival Hall. And so I was assisting more and more, and maybe that was always going to be the case. But as I said about the voiceover studio, I went, this is a bit of a bump in the road. But I started to assist on sessions more and more. And what they'd do is they'd hire a truck and just throw all the gear they need in. I can remember them using Yamaha consoles or some kind of PA console. But a beautiful 8-track Scully that they had, used to be in Albert Road, was thrown in the truck, and I assisted on that one of the first times. I didn't see any of this, but around about the same time, the houses in Albert Road were all being pulled down, and Bill suggested to John Farnham and Brian Cadd to go around there and let's get some photos of the old place being pulled down. This is the thing with studios, the history doesn't really make that much difference. All those great records that were done in there, and it's just the building's gone, but that's okay. The records still live on. So the activity started to pick up more and more. Peter Dawkins was the new in-house EMI producer. Tweed Harris, who did some great record. There's one great record he did with Rene Gay, really good. He was around a bit. Ian McKenzie was an assistant, started in the audio-visual, but he came up at a similar time that I did as an assistant. And that was the thing, they just needed more and more people to staff the studios. That's me in, I think, 1973. Could be my first beard, I'm not sure. But it didn't grow in very well, if it did. So the rooms were all finished, and the design was very unique, with the reds and the oranges and everything, done by Alex Stitt, and Peter Brown did the designs of the studios. Again, they had to start somewhere, but the look was something else. And this is just going on from the dubbing, and the dispatch department was really good. That's where I had to take the dubs, all the copies, sometimes 20, 30 little reels of commercials with voiceovers on them and music all mixed together. So the dispatch area really became quite a central nervous system for the whole place. And Marlene, I remember the staff or the personnel were always great, but Marlene was there for a lot of years, worked very, very hard, and it worked really, really well. So I dealt with her, that's why I'm showing this, I dealt with her for quite a few months there. And still around, they'd only been there a short time, but Bill was always looking for a partner to build the business, I guess to get more capital. And at one stage, they were talking with J. Alberts and Sons, Ted Albert being the CEO and the manager of that. And for a little while, they came down, did sessions. Alberts would do sessions down here. I remember John Paul Young being down for a little while, but constantly looking for people to invest or be partners with. And this just shows the gear that was available at the time, and it was the Optros were named, right? The Optro 100 tape machine and the Optro 1000, but that one that we saw earlier, I didn't see again. Don't remember ever seeing it at Bank Street. It could have been there in that time when I didn't really use the studios much or be in the studios very much. But it's all very, very straightforward. The machines were beautiful machines. As far as sounding, once I got to use them, they were really great sounding machines. But they always seem to be, why I'm mentioning the two different names, they always seem to be prototypes. Nearly everything Graham built seemed to be a prototype. And so that, this is a brochure that they took to Midem in Cairn, and it just for them to try and get international work, which worked. There were a lot of people, but this was a session for the Seven Little Australians, and the ABC, the MSO, or the ABC Orchestra. It was always those players. They were the ones that were booked, but they were never allowed to be moonlighting and doing other sessions because they were on contract, and they never liked having their photographs taken. So I'm not sure how they got to do this one, but this was one of the first sessions, big sessions in Studio One, exactly what it was built for, all in. And I've got a link to the soundtrack of Seven Little Australians that Jeff Hale's conducting, but Bruce Smeaton wrote, I think. That's Don Scott, the leader of the MSO, but he also led the section, or the studio section. A lovely man, was a leader for a long, long time. But the one I really enjoyed and was a great guy to work with was Bill Glassford. That's him there, hidden away in there. He booked the sessions, and in research I found out he was a vaudevillian player, but still played for the MSO. He may have been retired by then, but he did the booking for years and years and years and was a great guy to work with. So this is one of the first orchestral things I did. I'm going to play it. It's taken from YouTube and probably off vinyl, so it's a little bit scratchy, but it was one of the first orchestral sessions I did that Roger probably started me off on. But yes, it was trial by fire, but luckily no one got burnt because it was all in, and it worked really well. This was for Brian Rangot. Yeah, so that was the whole album when for 3AK, when it was a beautiful music station. And Brian Rangot, again, lovely guy. He didn't do too much recording, but he did a great job on that. And he didn't question. I guess Roger probably just said, "Oh, I'm okay to do it," but he didn't question at all. He was very inclusive, and it was a great album to do. And some of that reverb in that very dodgy recording was the EMT plates and AKG. I wasn't AKG, but it was the plates then, and they were great. One was modified by Graham Circle and another one. So they both had two different sounds in a room with remote attached to it. But they were the reverbs that we had at that point. So that was 73. We were all in properly in that building. And then David Syme came along, and that was one of the partners they bought out Bill or bought into the whole thing, and put a video company on the top floor. We were pretty well established, so I don't remember them kind of being too. It wasn't that disruptive, except an engineering department from the video company, video section became the main engineering staff, and they're the ones that started making decisions about gear. But that's okay because there were things still coming from Graham Thurkel, and that was the look that they went for, more red, the carpets and things like that. And I'll just quickly say that the old 16-track multi-track machines went to the voiceover studios, as did some of the other gear. And we were updating everything to 24-track by that point. And I don't know what number of Optro machines these were, but again, they sounded great. There were problems with the track amps and tracks dropping out, or if you did a vocal, it would double track. It wouldn't erase the track you were doing, and it would record another track over the top. But we just had to work around it, and that there were still workable machines. But just about every piece of gear we had was Optro, and the simple outboard gear too that we used. I got used to that compression, of course, sometimes, but recording naturally as best as I could. And within, I started doing lots of singles, and within 18 months, or maybe even less than that, I was recording bands and putting the singles were going out. Of course, Fable was a huge client. I won't play this now, but that just shows you Studio 2. I'll have a link to that if you want to hear it. But that charted with Penny Dyer. I eventually worked with all these people: Jeff Cox, Lou, and I think that's Angela Jones, who's Vince Jones' sister. So great bands, great players, always great players. So I won't play it. I'll just move on, and more singles. So I was established now. You do a little bit of work, and I always said I haven't killed anybody, so people come back. I haven't hurt anyone doing it. So success sort of breeds success, so people start asking for you. Roger would always recommend me on things, and sometimes it was things he didn't want to do, and it was definitely engineers that they didn't want to do things either on the weekend or whatever. But that's what got me to. I'd do demos and then I'd do main things. I assisted on the Parabram Brian Cadd thing, and the Ivan Hutchinson thing, which was great. He was great. He was a good arranger too. Bill Armstrong was supposed to do it, and he didn't turn up. So I set it up. It was a trio with a bass player, Ron Terry, and I think Billy Hyde on drums. So Bill turned up eventually, but I started it and I ended up finishing it. Just a honky-tonk favourites thing. Might have been on Fable, it might have been J&B, I don't remember. But at that same time in '74, the Optro Digi-patch arrived, which was the next big thing. And as far as the technique, not the technique, but what was being offered was great. It was you dialed in the ins to the outs with a keypad, and so no patching to speak of. But I remember one of the first sessions, the whole orchestra was out there, and it lost power, and it lost all of its assignments. So say about 32 or at least maybe 30 inputs gone with the session about to start. So that was one of its problems. But it had parametric EQ on the modules. I'm not sure. You can see there's blank panels there. Not everything was delivered. It had a beautiful separate Q send with effects that you could send to the headphones. So it was, again, a great idea. Never quite came off, but it was delivered, and they kept it going for quite a time. And I'll just point this out that a Cat Stevens single was recorded on it. You can see even less modules there, so it was probably really early on. But they came in and recorded a single called Another Saturday Night, which was a hit all over the world. And I'm just pointing out that it was recorded on Optro gear, and Ernie Rose engineered it beautifully, and a great session, all done in a day. I think they were touring, and so that's one of the sort of milestones of the Optro Digi-patch, that it was done on that single, and it sounds good. I've got a link to that as well. So more work, more and more work, and lots of more singles. Class of '74, which was a TV show with Brian Cadd. I worked a lot with Brian Cadd. He produced the Bootleg Family. My second album was the Bluestone album. I assisted on Moonshine, which Peter Best produced for Brian Cadd. But of course, I was going to do an album with Roger producing and me engineering, and he didn't end up producing. And we did a single first, which was Curiosity Killed the Cat, with this new band that Glenn Wheatley had put together from other bands. So I, kind of from default, I engineered it anyway, and the band produced it. Glenn Wheatley says he produced it, but they all produced it. And this was like a big break for me, and them as well. So I'll play this to you. So that single charted. We did it in a day. I think they had to go do a gig at night, so they came back and we mixed it the next day or the day after that, and out it went. And they'd been signed to EMI. Um, that was done separate from the album, but they put that out, and the album that Roger was supposed to produce was booked in 16 track. You can see in the background there with behind Glenn Shorrock. But we'd updated the studio with this Auditronic Sonom 36 grand, which was something. It was certainly clean. It worked. It was fine. It felt a little bit like a toy, but it did the job well. And again, in a time where no one, they saw it as something new. Nowadays, musicians or arrangers or players, they want to know about what the gear is, and how does it work, what sort of standard is it. That didn't happen in those days. They just were happy for it to work, and it did work. And again, the sound of the records, they're all recorded on Optro machines and sound pretty damn good to me. So we started the first album with Little River Band, with a little bit of success starting to happen for them as well. So I just want to point out that that's probably one of the worst album covers ever put out, that one on the left there. And the American album cover was a lot better, and that was shot where they were rehearsing for the album. Other thing I want to say is that this band was so tight, they'd been on the road for so long, that they came in, and this single that they put out, so they that whole album, they pretty much played everything live except for the vocals, and that's what made it a great thing for me to work on and hear it all at once. I'm showing you this because in those days there was nowhere to eat late at night. During the day, of course, in South Melbourne, but late at night, say if you finished doing a session or around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, you wanted something to eat, you couldn't ring up Uber or anything. you had to go searching for it, or you'd have to send an assistant or, a band, a roadie or something out for it. This place was a godsend. Silvertop Taxis around the corner. It's no longer there. They were famous for doing the age commercials, where the guy with the deep voice, which is the guy second from the left there, with he had 2 or 3 different age commercials, and it was great. But they were a great place to go to for a mixed grill or anything. But we lived on it over the first 2, maybe even 3 albums with Little River Band. But all the sessions that were in there. I wanted to mention Robin Gray, who came to do the showcase, which was the Brian May show band talent show, which I did a few weekends of, but it was so busy that I wasn't begrudgingly doing it, but there were so many things to do that Roger and Bill got Robin to come in and specifically do that, start with that show, which was done every weekend, all in, recording like 6 or 7 acts at once. And Robin had cut his teeth on the Young Talent time and was great. He was there for a few years. So, yeah, he got to use the Digi-patch a lot. I can't remember him being too messed around by it, but you can see there that some of the panels are being filled in a bit more. But, yeah, they kept getting more and more modules for that thing. I did, I'm pointing this out because I did Joe Cocker at Festival Hall. I think I assisted on that one. I'm not sure. I remember running down the back, tiny little back passage around the back of the stage and nearly bowling him over because I was told to go out and plug something in and run back to the truck. And he was just getting ready, doing his normal thing, and I just was steaming down the track and nearly knocked him over. But it was a great show. But then I got to do him over 3 nights in 1977 at the Palais, and he was great to work with. The guy there, Michael, who was one of the guys that put Woodstock together. I didn't think of that. I didn't know that at the time, but he was his manager at the time. Lovely, big, gigantic man, very quiet. Paid cash and took the multi-tracks away. But I don't think they were used for anything. I think they just recorded whenever they could. But that was a great, parked out the back of the Palais, which we did a lot. I've got Gadinsky showing there. I think he would always bring his cassette player along and want live mixes as good as possible, which I always did anyway. I tried to do a mix within reason to hear and for people to hear later on. But Joe and the band came into the truck, still very busy doing lots of records. The After Hours album with Little River Band, singles with Stars, a single with Shirley Strawn. I've got a link to that and a couple other things as well. I won't play that one, but just more and more people coming in because the studio attracted so many people, and success attracted it as well. So being able to do a second album with Little River Band, and some people say this was their best album because they didn't try and, not that they didn't try and do singles, but they sort of did it like albums were done back then, whatever songs they had at the time. But it was a great album to do. And Glenn always said he co-produced or produced them. He came in and was involved in discussions and things and was very much involved, but the band put it together. Them as songwriters, they're all pretty experienced. They'd all been in other bands before. So, yeah, it was a great thing because it was done over, the first album was done over maybe 10 days. This might have been done over 2 weeks. And I think that was a great way to do things. They were always ready, they were prepared and ready to go. So I just kept doing more and more things, a lot of live things. Marsha Hines was live. Sherbet, which Richard Lush produced, we recorded in a couple of different places. That was put out. Some albums that no one's heard about. I did a single with Mother Goose called Baked Beans, and then they came in and wanted to do an album like Genesis. It didn't make any sense at all, but that they got me as a producer for free because I came with the studio. So that happened a lot. This is the single off the next album. I will play this because these were all very important records. But the Americans put After Hours and Diamantina Cocktail together and made an album out of all of those tracks. But this was the single off that. So that single did very, very well, and the album started to do well, more and more work in America. I don't know if you want to stop, if there's any questions coming in at this stage, if this is a good spot to stop.
Yes, are there any questions? You can type them in your chat session.
I'll keep going if there aren't any questions.
Yeah,
The
carry on, Ross.
the staff was one of the things. I mean, when I started, Roger and Helen, that's them in the middle. Um, Helen was assisting Bill, but the sort of environment created by Bill and Roger was a great thing to be dropped into, and always supportive and great guidance, and everybody worked really hard. One thing forgot to say, when you just got paid a certain amount, and that was fine. It's one of those things, I would have done it for nothing, but I'm glad I got paid. But when David Simon came in, it wasn't unionised, but we were given overtime and double time. So you can imagine the fact that we'd work 80 hours, 60 hours, whatever, work from 10 till 12 at night, to work on the weekends. The money that came in at that point, this is in 1974, 75, was outrageous. It was kind of like, hang on, how come we weren't paid this in the first place? But I wasn't that negative about it. It was more like, damn, they're really paying us properly. It was an incredible boost because you do the work anyway, but then you started getting paid for doing that work because I'd do sessions, go late at night. We'd all do sessions, but go late at night, and then need to come back in to do a Peter Best session at 8 o'clock in the morning. And at one point there, we were always leaving each other's setups with uh, rhythm sections ready to go, and so you just walk in and be able to know with it written down, and so it was constant work, and it got a little bit tiring, but we were young, so it was okay. But so many people, a lot of people came and went, but always great people working at the place. Um, this I just want to. I don't have any sound or anything for this, but John Denver was touring with Elvis's band, and a guy called Ray Rivermonte somehow got them to come into the studio. And that's Hal Blaine, Emery Gordy, Herb Pedersen, Glenn D. Harding. These were all not just Elvis's band, but they were all great musicians. And I can't find the record anywhere. We did 2 tracks just in a night, and he gave them an envelope. I think had $50 in the envelope for each of them. But they were more than happy to do it. And Terry Dean interviewed them. I don't know where that interview's gone, but just great to meet them, great to work with them. And just one night out of the blue, there you go, Elvis's band, incredible. John Denver didn't come in, but that was okay. So Oop, go back. Yeah. More Little River Band albums, but I was then becoming an assistant on them, or second engineer, because they actually booked two studios. Ernie, who'd started touring with them, Ernie Rose, became the main engineer, but I got to work with them again. And there's something about being able to work with people. You get the kind of empathy that you get with them. You know what they're like. You know how far they can go. You know what they want from a session and things like that. It's a great thing to be able to do. But work kept coming, and the Paradise album, I did singles with Stars, with B. Birtles producing, and then Rick Formosa did the album. It was a great album to do. He was very talented. He'd left LRB, of course, and wanted to broaden his horizons in many ways. 79, we were getting a Westlake control room built. The poor old Digi-patch was on its way out, and it never quite got up to its full potential. And that, with the David Syme having an influx of capital, we were able to put together a budget that had a Westlake control room, and I just put those in because someone took photographs of the thing. But goodbye Digi-patch indeed. And we got the Westlake control room built properly to all the right specs, a floating control room, which I didn't quite understand at the time, but I know what it means now. No walls connected to any other wall, or the floor. A new Harrison. You can see there that it's a 40-channel console, but we only bought 32 channels at the time, obviously on a budget. But a beautiful control room. Funny to see the Oratones there, but that's exactly what I mixed on. My final mixes were done on Oratones. For radio, you go up on the big speakers, but I hardly ever used the big speakers. We've got Ampex machines as well. The Harrison came with a VCA controlled computer mix, but it took up one track on the multi-track. It's always a payoff with those things, but it worked quite well. You had to null out the fader to get back to the start with each mix, but that was a great help. But yes, beautiful control room. Was used for years and years and years, and worked for years and years and years. But the thing also that came with it was the Ampex machine, so no more Optro machines. That was one of the decisions that the engineering department made for us. We wanted Studers, or the consensus was pushed for Studers, but the MM1200 was a good working machine. It would drift in bias. All machines have some kind of problem or have pitfalls, so it would drift in bias. I actually never learned how to line up a machine, but I learned how to get the bias correct on the Ampex machine, because you'd be there at 11 o'clock at night and you'd be doing a bass or something, and it would go fuzzy on you, and you'd go, the bias has gone out. So you'd have to, and it was to do with the temperature and different things like that. So I did learn how to line up the 1200s. The ATRs were beautiful machines as well. 4-track for doing left, center, right mixes, and so it was a great boost to happen. And of course, it got more work coming. I'm going to mention Up There Gazelle, but I'm not going to play it because it started as an ad for football that Mike and Peter put together. Mike brought in the skeletal remains of the ad, and Peter fleshed it out. I'll put Mike Brady's Invisible Man album there because it was done at the same time. But Up There Gazelle was the biggest record at the time. It was the biggest selling single in Australia ever. It's been beaten by Sharp Your Face, I think, which was another Mike Brady record. But yes, that was done in a day, and a huge record. So more work, a lot of it live. The Free Kicks thing was live, doing a lot of recording at Bombay Rock. Half of Mondo Rock was live. That Texas album was live. Yes, it says it there, it's live. And I'll take a link to this, but I just wanted to mention Stockley C. Mason because they were a band with a lot of potential. And there's a clip of this song, Avalanche, which I'll share the link with. But they were another supergroup that didn't quite work. It was odd. All the right things were there. I think it always comes down to songs when it's about the music and albums. I'm not going to play this either because everyone knows this album, but David Briggs, fresh with LRB, produced this record and hugely successful. They were big on the road and just the timing about it, but they were so loved. It almost didn't matter what they put out, almost. But we did Beautiful People, and then two or three other singles came off that record, but that was a big selling record as well. I recorded Midnight Oil live and with the truck at Showgrounds, I think, and they flew me up and drove me to the music farm to meet with them with the multi-tracks. But the problem was that the multi-tracks were Dolby and there were no Dolby. That's happened a few times where I've been taken to places and haven't done the research on what's available. But what did happen is that they said, oh, we're in here, we're going to record something, do you want to do it? And I went, okay. So we spent the day recording, and then we spent the next 2 days, 48 hours, we stayed up to finish the thing off, and that became the Bird Noises EP. I've got a link to that. Again, that's on YouTube. But Les Karski mixed it, but it pretty much sounded exactly the way that it left that studio, which was a fine studio. Small, but it worked. But it was just one of those great things that happened very, very quickly. I took a holiday in late 81 and went to Sydney, and I went on a cruise, and then I realised if I stayed away, I just stayed away. So I ended up staying away for, I think, 2 months. Might have been 6 weeks, but went, if I don't go back, they can't. They kind of were calling me to come back. But then I came back and did these records, the Andrew Durant memorial concert after dear Andrew died. That was a great album or concert to record. But so I came back to just jumped back into more work, and it was also again that thing, I didn't kill anyone, and success breeds success. You do these records and off you go. Are there any questions yet? Do you want to stop? No one's interested in asking questions.
I think they're all enthralled.
Okay, well, I'll keep going then. So, and I'll try to go a bit faster. I'm near the end. 1981. There's only a couple of years to go. So I'm pointing this out, apart from the fact that that's one of the rhythm sections that Peter Best used. Peter Sullivan, Don Stevens, and great guitarist Tony Naylor. Mike Clark on bass, great player. Ron Sandilands, another great player. But through all this, the commercials were still one of the big earners, and also Peter Best didn't like being handed from one engineer to another. So I did have to, we shared him in a way, but he didn't like being shared a lot. And that, I just point that out, and I just happened to take these photos. So there was never any time to take photographs, but I just happened to take a photograph of this session. So he'd do, on Mondays, 8 o'clock in the morning, he'd do maybe 5 or 6 demos of commercials. He'd send them off to the advertising agency. Then he'd come in on Thursday and finish the ones that have been approved. So he was incredibly prolific. Slip, Slop, Slap, all of those famous things. Razzmatazz, so many different ads. Peter did commercials with Mike, and eventually did them on his own. But just your feet not touching the ground. And I did start to get a little bit jaded about starting at 8 o'clock in the morning. And there were sessions that I would finish the night before, and I'd have to do it because of just the way that it was scheduled. So it was tough, but the work was still good. They were fun sessions most of the time, grueling other times, but I want to play this one because this was so exciting to do the Police live at Festival Hall. It was the second last gig of the whole world tour, and again doing the mix live in the truck for people to listen to. We mixed it the next day. Their front of house guy said he was their co-manager. He came in and we mixed it the next day. And I found this on YouTube. It's been released as a bootleg, but so it's a bit fizzy. But it was such an exciting concert that I just have to play it. Yeah, just a great concert. Having the audience on faders, especially like Roxanne. The whole thing's on YouTube if you want to listen to it. It's fizzy because it's the broadcast mix, not the pre-broadcast. But Roxanne, like mostly 4,000 girls singing Roxanne. Like it was just an incredible show, and they were at their peak. I mean, I think they peaked for a long, long time, but it was just an incredible show to do, and it worked out well. We mixed it, and it was on FM that night or the next night. So it's odd that it's appeared as it is as a whole album, a bootleg album. So it's available. I'll share the link with you. I won't play this because I'm running over my time, yeah, so I won't play this one. It's a film soundtrack, but I can supply the link to that. I started to do, with Roger's guidance, I started to do soundtracks more and more, again, because that's what we were attracted for. And these are more soundtracks, TV shows and some Peter did, well, because of all the different arrangers and writers and shows that were trying to get up and running. Class of '74 was the Brian Cadd thing. Solo One Peter Sullivan did. Special Squad was Graham Lyle. Pardon me. Thousand Skies was Bruce Smeaton. So all of these different arrangers. Road Games was Brian May. Breakfast in Paris was Brian May. 7 Up, I think, was Red Simons. I'm not exactly sure. Dogs in Space was a collection of people. More Things Change was Peter Best, I think. And I can't see the other one behind there. I don't know what it is. But Street Hero was a lot of different songs, and I did a track with Leo Sayer and somebody and a couple of other things. So the work was definitely there. This was the Angels live, and I did 4 different venues, and the truck broke down at one of them, and I wish I took a photograph of this incredibly gigantic Ford pickup truck, tow truck that came over the hill. We had to get to the next venue, and I stayed with it overnight so that the pickup truck could tow it to the Astra. This fantastic, big, rusty old thing. It was incredible. It was like some kind of dinosaur coming to pick it up. And so that was it came out as the Angels Never So Live, and great to record them. And then it came out again. They used more tracks on Live Line, which was released later on. Great band, really, again, a great live band, pardon me. Again, there's a link to that, to a couple of those tracks. I'll supply that. Mondo Rock, I did a single with them called Cool World. I won't play it, everyone knows that one. But I did a few things with Ross Wilson, Primal Park and this one. I didn't work on the album, I don't think, but Mark Moffat produced it, a great producer. And Gil Matthews was very, very focused on his drum sound to the point where I thought he was producing it at one point. But that's okay. It turned out well. It was a great sounding record. And then Stevie Wonder booked the place for a week, and I was there. I went to the concert on Monday or Tuesday, and then came back to the studio because he was going to work after his gigs, but he didn't come in until either the Friday night. That's David Wilson in the background, who was our commercial manager or PR guy, and Gary Olazabal was his engineer. And that shows a great photograph of the phone booth that was in the Westlake room, which was a great additive to the whole thing. But anyway, Stevie used his own digital PCM machine. He did an edit of a track that he was going to sing to on TV. We did do vocals with the backing vocal called Wonderland was the band, and so that was great. But then I heard later on that the multi-tracks were lost between Melbourne and Perth, so the album never came out. So that was disappointing, but great to work with him. And he loved Melting Moments, the biscuits. I had to go out, and because I didn't do much on the session, I had to go out and buy him a couple of packets of those at 7-Eleven, and I was happy to do it. I won't play this one either. There's another soundtrack. I'll just keep moving on. This was just to show us doing orchestral stuff and the kind of mix of recordings and things that I was able to do, which I still feel blessed that I was able to do those things. No, go away. They sent me overseas on a fact-finding mission, and I went to Westlake Studios and sat in their reception for about 2 hours and never got to see anything. And I was actually made an appointment for that. The guy from Bread was doing a session, and that was the studio that Michael Jackson was in. I don't think when I was there. John Boylan from the Producing Little River Band got me to have a look at Sunset Sound, a famous studio. But because I'd worked with or been with Gary Olazabal, I went to Stevie Wonder's studio, which was an old radio studio that he'd converted. And he was set up doing things there. They had the record plant mobile because they didn't have a control room yet. So the fact finding was interesting. I went to record plant. They were upgrading one studio because Fleetwood Mac were about to come in. So they were rebuilding the studio for Fleetwood Mac. That's one of the record plant mobiles that were there. I went to George Massenberg's complex because someone knew him, so I got to cold call him. I went to Glen Sound because I'd heard, Roger had been to some of these places, and that guy took me to Paramount Studios, where Record Plant had just taken over the music studio and called it Studio M, and they were refurbishing it and getting it off sprockets and onto multitrack, which Roger had already started doing. So it was interesting to go to these places. New York was next. I went to the power station. They had a pull tech for every track. So they had 24 pull techs in the wall, which was an amazing thing to see. A&R Studios, I went there because that had done a lot of records. Is it Phil Ramone, who was the producer that worked out of there? I went to Electric Ladyland because I wanted to go to Electric Ladyland. That was before it had been refurbished. It was sort of a little tired. But I looked up above the control room and there was a window and all of Jimi Hendrix multitracks were sitting there. So that was, whether it's a fact I found out. Radio City Music Hall, I just called them, and they had a studio across the way, and I had a look at that, but that was just because it was a famous place. I went to Sterling Sound and met George Marino, and sat with him for a while and talked to him about things he'd produced, mastered. He said there was an Australian or New Zealand band that had drug problems. He'd just done a single, and I couldn't work how it was, and then I figured out later on it was Dragon. He'd mastered something for Dragon. So went to London via Italy, went to Olympic because Roger Savage came from there, and met up with Keith Grant. That's the only photograph I could find of him. He didn't quite look like that when I was there. He was a little thinner than that. But he talked about he'd just done Nicholas Nickleby, the mini-series, and was doing lots of orchestral things and film soundtracks. And I worked out in retrospect that the session that was set up, you can just see a fragment of it there, was Lentil, Barbara Streisand. I walked through the vocal booth and there were flowers there, and it might have been a Sunday or something, so it was a day off. But I worked out that they were doing the soundtrack to Yentl. I hope I said Yentl or not Lentil. So that was quite a thing. And Olympic was a famous studio and hung on for a little while, disappeared. I went to Air Studios to have a look there. Townhouse had just been taken over by Virgin, and that was in great shape. So what I found out about the fact finding was that if you've got money, you can buy what you need and get it installed properly. I'm going to play you another live thing. Hope that's okay. This was also exciting, but I got to record Joe Jackson 2 years in a row in Festival Hall, Hordern Pavilion, and this was one of the singles that came off of. So that came out as a four-sided vinyl record, mixed by David Kirschenbaum, who I met. He came over to Australia and produced a few acts, but it was great sometimes you record things like the Ray River Money thing, and they just disappear. Not very often, but it was great to have something like that. And he was great to work with. I was told a couple of people, roadies and people like that, said he was difficult, but I think because I was delivering, he came in and had a listen to in the truck when I recorded the sound check and things, and went and checked a few things out and said, I wanted to know how much control he had, and he was great to work with. So I mean, people can have different sides to their nature. So I got the sunny side and was happy to have it. He was great to work with. I'm pointing this out because I really liked being able to do multiple albums with people, like I said before, about having empathy. Karen was a great singer, a lovely girl. Ross Burton produced them. Ron Tudor, it was his label. And we did in quick succession a few albums. And Ross, who's a great arranger, and had already worked with her. And some sessions, not a dream because it's still hard work, but it was great to be able to do multiple records with her and Ross, dear Ross, who died way prematurely. Could have gone on and done many things. He did do TV work, and there's a lot of stuff online that you can find of his, but they were great records to do, and very successful for her and everyone involved. And I did multiple albums with Vince Jones, who's a particular kind of personality, but a great musician, a great performer, Sometimes different bands every time, different players every time, but really, really good players and great records to work on. Same with Little River Band. So I worked on maybe 5 of their records. It really is a pleasure, especially getting to know someone, whether they're difficult or not, to do multiple projects with them. This was an interesting thing. I'm moving fast to the end now, just so that everyone knows it's close now. Asked to get the truck out to, pardon me, to the Waverley, what was called VFL Park, to record the audience of this concert, Simon and Garfunkel concert. Roy Haley, the famous engineer that did all of their stuff, early stuff, was there. We were just set up to record the audience, and then as we were doing bits and pieces, Roy would say, "Oh, can we record the piano?" And really, it's just a matter of plugging it in and getting a level on it. We eventually recorded the whole band. We did record the audience, and what they did was they put the lyrics to a song that they were going to release on a forthcoming album that I don't think ever came out on the screen, and the audience did sing. And what they did was all of those people, they multi-tracked them. So I don't know what that is, whether it's 10,000 or something, was multi-tracked. So there's 30, 40,000 people singing this song. They did a good job of it, never released. But the thing I wanted to talk about, it's election day. I was standing in the truck doorway. Bob Hawke walks up. He was backstage with a whole entourage and press and people, and looked up to me and said, "Should be a good show." And I went, "Yeah, it should be a good show." I had no idea who I was. My legs appeared on the news because it was just a shot of him. And I said, "Good luck today." And he went, "Oh, thanks very much." And off he went, like being followed by sheep. It was just a very, very... not an odd thing, because I knew it was election day, but I don't know whether he stayed for the show. It was a great show. Richard T on piano. There's the band there. Billy Payne, synthesizer. I mean, look at the lineup. It's incredible lineup, but didn't come to anything. It's sitting somewhere. There's a multi-track somewhere with thousands of people singing this song that was never released. This thing was released, Jokers and Queens, live at the St George RSL. A great show to do. Is it Peter Feynman? Is he the director that used to be at Channel 9? This was one of his first freelance shows that he put together. A great show. Again, there's links to that. That's Andrew McVitie, the name's there. Andrew McVitie, David Wilson, Bill Towski, who I meant to mention anyway. He was our head tech. Jeremy English, John English's brother, and Kai Dahlstrom, who went on to do Sing Sing, drove the truck for us many times. I was there when he was bitten by the spider, which was terrible. He was bitten by a redback or something, and he limped for years after it, but he's okay now. But he went on to do Sing Sing. Great group of people, and it was a great show to do. And Peter Feynman kept complimenting, or Andrew said he couldn't believe the mix that he was hearing as a playback from the rehearsals and things. And this is that thing of wanting to get it sounding as good as possible. And I guess, I don't know, in TV or not, but he was just like very complimentary about hearing everything, which enabled him to make decisions about vision. There are bits and pieces of it around. I don't know if it came out on DVD, but there's bits and pieces on YouTube. Again, I won't play it. Another live recording. This was Phalanx with Australian Crawl. John Sayers recorded some of the things. I did 2 or 3 shows and mixed it with Simon Binks producing, but they got me to produce it just to keep an eye on him. That was okay, and very successful. Again, they were just a hugely successful band. There's bits and pieces available, but I won't play that. I will play this. if you have the patience, because this was a huge record for me. And again, produced for, it says Glenn Wheatley produced it, but I'm going to say he didn't. Lovely guy, but he didn't produce it. It was an interesting thing. They wanted, they got me for free, basically. They didn't have to pay me as a producer, but I did get points on the record, which eventually came to something. But they didn't, the success was phenomenal. Like it, throughout the world, it did well as a first single. And people always thought that it was an English band, which that's okay. It sounded like that new wave thing or new romantic thing. They had it pretty well together. I added a few things and made a few suggestions, but they had the song down. I'd already chosen the next single, but they went with someone else. And I always thought that I made it too much. I made the session too enjoyable, or it was too easy. They didn't want the drummer to play on the record, and I insisted that the real drums were on there, and had to work hard to get them on there. But so there were things like that. Whether that was something, you never can work out what happens. But I was ready to do the album, but I didn't get to do it. But this was a big record throughout the world, and it's funny how it just kind of works out. You try to work out the formula, but sometimes you don't know. And I've never been that ambitious about, oh come on, I'll go overseas or do something. It's always come to, the sessions have come to me, and this was one of those things, and I'm happy for it to do it, but was a little bit disgruntled that they wouldn't let me do the next single or the album. And whether it was management or all the hoo-ha, they'd had the success with that, and then just turned their back on it. It was, it is laughable now, but fun to do. We were updating the truck at this point. Again, more money coming in. We were able to get a small Harrison console to fit. Started using 2 multi-tracks for real changes. That's Roger, who was just about to leave the studio. He was about to start Sound Firm. But the updates and things like that were always great to be involved in. This was an interesting change when Sony made an offer to supply us with the Sony Dash machines. I think SR analog is probably one of the best sounding systems ever, and we'd just started using that, and then bang, kind of early stage digital, and I would go back to SR analog if it wasn't for all the different multi-tracks, lining the machine up, lining the SRs up, but such a beautiful sound that was just short-lived. But anyway, so we did a single it wasn't a promotion, it was one of Ron's singles, and that song is available, and if you listen to it, you can hear that it's an early stage digital record. It's it's okay, but with synthesizers as well, so that messes with it a little bit. But so we were supplied with Sony machines, and they worked. It was great that they had their own time code built in. I mean, you had to stripe the time code, and that was really handy. They were very, very reliable machines. Just didn't sound that great in retrospect. It just wasn't a great sounding system. But anyway, that's just how it happened. It attracted people to it. It did repulse a few people, but it attracted more than not. And then when Roger left, Bill had already gone in the 70s. I'm sorry about the photograph, but that's the only one I could find of the two of us together. David Wilson, who was always involved in the commercial side of things, we sorted it out that I would manage the music studios, even though really they didn't need much management, and David would manage the commercial side of things, and it worked really well. So I was still able to do the sessions. It didn't take much. It was sort of a well-oiled machine, the studio. I mean, you booked things in, but then I started making rumbles about getting an SSL, because I don't know whether there might have been one or two in Sydney, and the musicians started to talk about it as well. And I think the Dire Straits record came out, great sounding record, but it was just about upgrading. But it was so expensive, and I actually, first time ever, I wrote a letter to management. I think it was Ted Gregory. It might have been David Syme as well, but I wrote a letter just saying what it would mean to be able to offer this new exciting console to people. They actually they wanted me to put a budget together to say how much money would come in, and there's no way it could cover it. It might cover it in 5 years' time, but I didn't have the wherewithal to do that. I just said, I will guarantee that as soon as you put the console in, we'll have bookings for at least 6 months, if not more. And that's exactly what happened. People just got excited. So maybe there wasn't one in Sydney, but there was definitely to offer something like that.
Was that the last machine that they installed?
That was the last console put in there. It was never, when Ernie sold it, Kai bought that whole package. He bought Studio One as the multi-tracks, the Bernoullis, everything. He bought the whole package and put it in as his SSL mixing room. And I have to say, it got really crunchy towards the end, but consoles do that, because I worked on it at Sing Sing, and it got really crunchy towards the end. Yeah, Kai bought that whole package. So it would have been the last console, because that's when Ernie sold everything off. Yeah, so it came in, it worked well. I just have a little postscript here with some of these records I kept doing, Dogs in Space soundtrack, and I kept working and doing different things. But then I was put on this album called Between a Rock and a Hard Place, an incredibly apt title, and they just call it Crawl and not Australian Crawl. But I was the engineer on that with a producer who shall remain nameless, and it was one of the longest albums I ever worked on, with a newly formed Australian Crawl. The drummer had gone, the bass player had gone, great John Watson, Harry Bruce on bass. Everything was in place except the songs, I'd say, and the attitude of the band and the producer. It went for 4 months, and I lasted 3. And Doug Brady, who was assisting on it, took over and mixed it, and it was unfortunately the least successful Australian Crawl album ever, for many reasons. But what happened was that Ernie Rose had come off the road, and he and Ted Gregory started talking about changing things around, and they kind of made it difficult for me to stay, so I left. He didn't like the idea, because I actually said, I'm not going to, I need to get off this record, stop this record, I want to get off, because it just was unbearable. I won't go into details, but it was unbearable, and for me as an engineer. Some people said that I was put out of sorts because I wanted to produce it. Not true at all. It wasn't true. I've never been like that. If decisions are made, I'm okay with it. And it was great to work with them again. And the band there was everything about it that could have been great, except for the songs and the attitude that was going on. So that was what finished me. So I left in '86. I can't remember when, but that was the final stage. That's up on the roof at AAV. It used to be a great place to go to, sit up there. Fresh air, because there was certainly none in the studio.
Ross, you packed a heck of a lot into what appears to be about 20 years. And I think there's quite a bit more of a story to tell there. And you've packed an awful lot into the hour and a half today too. So
Yeah, sorry for going over. I didn't. I tried to keep it concise, but
no, you've got very interesting stories to tell. But maybe we should reserve you for a follow-up of the next 20 years. Find out what you've been up
20
to.
or more. Yes, yeah.
Well, we do it in blocks of 20. There you go.
Yeah, okay.
Anyway,
I better start doing it now.
I probably do need to wrap it up there.
Yes. Thanks,
If
Graham.
there are any questions, I don't think there are. There was one concerning the equipment that was used in the early days. That's the only one I got. Any other questions, shoot them through. And if we can't get to them now, we can follow up.
Yes.
The session's been very informative and very good.
And as I said, I'll supply links that will relate to the frame numbers.
Yeah, if you can get the links to us, and we can put those in amongst the material that we're putting together.
Yeah.
At this stage, I'd really like to thank you, Ross, for taking the time and doing the prep and coming along to give us an amazing insight into what is an area we don't usually stray across. I don't usually stray across it. So,
Well, I hope it was at least interesting. It's funny to relive it, and in such a sort of proceed form, but it's also been interesting for me to go back what I called the shiny tracks that are now covered in dust. Graham Owens would know about that. He was there right at the start. But yeah, the gear well, you know that I was going to include the kind of beginnings of Armstrongs, but it was Optronics gear with Ampex 4-track mono machines. Graham Owens would be able to say what mono machines, but they were probably rollers or bayers.
yes.
But
Okay. Well, if there are any other questions, if there aren't any other questions, I'd really like everybody to thank you, Ross. And if I can get you to unmute, and then we'll end the session here. But there's always a bit of flow on, and people have a few discussions to make after the formal session has ended. So I'd like you all to put your hands together to thank Ross for this. Thank you too for coming along, and everybody seems to be interested, so that's excellent.